Captain Zephyr's 6 arms trembled as she watched the scanner readings on her bridge. The elegant curves of her Kalani vessel, the Star Whisper, had served her people's merchant fleet for 3 generations. Now it drifted helplessly in the void between star systems, its crystalline engines dead and life support failing. Status report. She clicked in her native language, her translator collar converting the sounds to standard galactic speech for her mixed crew. Engineer Thok, a bulky granite skin from the mining worlds, shook his massive head. The quantum cascade hit us harder than we thought, Captain. Main engines are completely fried. Life support has maybe 6 hours left, and that's if we shut down everything non-essential. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of failing systems. Zephyr's crew of 12 represented 4 different species, all now facing the same grim reality. They were too far from any major shipping lanes for conventional rescue, and their emergency beacon had a range measured in light minutes, not light years. Navigator Pip, a small furry squeaker barely larger than a human child, consulted her charts with obvious desperation. Nearest inhabited system is Kepler 442. That's where the human colony is. But Captain, that's almost 4 light years away. Even if they received our distress call, no reasonable species would attempt a rescue at that distance. Zephyr's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Humans. She had heard stories about the newest members of the Galactic Council. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, making them practically infants by galactic standards. Most species took centuries to develop reliable FTL technology. The humans had done it in decades after first achieving spaceflight. They're still considered probationary members, Communications Officer Rilk observed, his serpentine head swaying nervously. The Council barely recognizes their territorial claims. Why would they risk their primitive vessels for strangers? But Zephyr remembered something else about humans. During the trade negotiations on Centauri Station last year, she had met a human merchant named Sarah Chen. The woman had gone out of her way to help Zephyr navigate the complex human bureaucracy, asking for nothing in return. When Zephyr had asked why, Sarah had simply said, "Because you needed help." Send the distress signal to Kepler 442, Zephyr decided. Full emergency protocols. Include our species manifest, crew count, and situation status. Rilk's scales shifted color with surprise. Captain, with respect, even if the humans wanted to help, their ships are slow. Galactic Intelligence reports their fastest vessels can barely manage 15 times light speed. They'd need weeks to reach us. Then we'd better hope their reputation for stubbornness is as accurate as their reputation for foolishness, Zephyr replied, settling into her command chair. Send the signal. The message shot across space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying the desperate plea of 12 beings whose only hope lay with a species most of the galaxy considered too young, too reckless, and too primitive to matter. On Kepler 442, Admiral Rebecca Torres received the distress call while reviewing patrol schedules in her orbital command center. The message had bounced through 3 relay stations before reaching human space, degrading slightly but still clear enough to understand. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Commander Jackson reported, "we're looking at a Kalani merchant vessel, dead in space approximately 3.8 light-years from our position. Mixed crew of 12, life support failing." Torres studied the holographic display showing the ship's location. It was indeed far outside normal rescue parameters. Most species would file the appropriate paperwork, send condolences to next of kin, and move on. The mathematics of interstellar rescue were harsh and unforgiving. "How long would it take our fastest ship to reach them?" she asked. "The Defiant could make the run in about 18 hours if Captain Morrison pushes the engines," Jackson replied. "But ma'am, that's just one destroyer. If there are complications..." Torres was already reaching for her communicator. "Get me the Third Fleet." Jackson's eyes widened. The Third Fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and support vessels. It was nearly a quarter of humanity's entire deep space navy. "Admiral, the cost alone..." "Lieutenant Commander," Torres interrupted. "When someone calls for help, we answer. That's what makes us human." She activated the fleet-wide channel. "All ships of the Third Fleet, this is Admiral Torres. Emergency deployment authorized. We have people in trouble." Across the Kepler 442 system, massive human warships began powering up their engines. The Defiant, Enterprise, Thunderchild, and dozens of others started their journey toward a patch of empty space where 12 beings waited for death or salvation. Captain Morrison of the Defiant reviewed the mission parameters as his ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. His crew of 200 had been expecting a routine patrol, not a desperate rescue mission across impossible distances. But no one questioned the orders. The human fleet had never abandoned anyone who called for help, and they weren't about to start now. "Sir," his navigator reported, "at current speed we'll reach the distress coordinates in 17 hours 43 minutes. The rest of the fleet will arrive within 6 hours after us." Morrison nodded. In the depths of space, the Star Whisper continued its slow death spiral, while its crew rationed air and tried to stay warm. They had no way of knowing that 49 human warships were racing through the void toward them, carrying crews willing to risk everything for strangers they had never met. The simple call for help had indeed been met with a Deathworlder fleet. Aboard the Star Whisper, the crew huddled together in the main cargo bay, the only section of the ship they could still keep marginally warm. Captain Zephyr watched the chronometer count down their remaining life support with grim determination. 4 hours had passed since they sent their distress signal, and the ship's failing systems painted an increasingly desperate picture. "Captain," Rilke whispered, his serpentine form coiled tightly to conserve heat. "Perhaps we should prepare the final messages to our families." Before Zephyr could respond, the communications array crackled to life with a burst of static. Through the interference came a voice speaking accented but clear Galactic standard. "Star Whisper, this is Captain Morrison of the Earth vessel Defiant. We have received your distress call and are en route to your position. Estimated time of arrival is 13 hours, 27 minutes. Please respond if you are receiving this transmission." The cargo bay fell silent except for the sound of 12 beings hardly daring to breathe. Engineer Thok was the first to speak, his gravelly voice filled with disbelief. "They're actually coming? But Captain, 13 hours. We'll be dead in 2. Zephyr's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this information. "Rilke, can you boost our transmitter enough to respond?" The communications officer worked frantically at a portable unit. "I can give you maybe 30 seconds before the power drain becomes too much." Zephyr activated the transmitter. "Human vessel Defiant. This is Captain Zephyr of the merchant ship Star Whisper. We did not expect anyone to respond. Our life support will fail in approximately 2 hours. We are grateful that you tried." The response came immediately. "Captain Zephyr, this is Admiral Torres aboard the cruiser Thunderchild. We're not just trying, we're succeeding. I need you to listen carefully. Do you have any portable atmospheric recyclers aboard your vessel?" 2 emergency units, but they only have power cells for 3 hours each," Zephyr replied. "Good. Activate both units now and seal your crew in the smallest compartment possible. We're pushing our engines beyond safety limits to reach you. The Defiant will arrive in 11 hours, not 13. Can you hold on that long?" Navigator Pip quickly calculated on her pad. "If we seal ourselves in the navigation alcove with both recyclers, and if everyone goes into meditation sleep to reduce oxygen consumption, we might last 9 hours, maybe 10 if we're lucky." The silence stretched across space as the humans processed this information. Then Admiral Torres's voice returned, calm but determined. "Understood, Star Whisper. We're going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Possibly both. Hold position and conserve everything you can." The transmission ended, leaving the crew of the Star Whisper to contemplate their impossible situation. They began moving to the navigation alcove, a cramped space barely large enough for 12 beings, setting up the emergency recyclers and preparing for what might be their final hours. Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet flagship Thunderchild, Admiral Torres stood before a holographic display showing the impossible physics of their rescue attempt. Chief Engineer Rodriguez was explaining why her orders violated several fundamental principles of safe space travel. "Admiral, if we push the quantum drives past 110% of rated capacity, we risk cascade failures across the entire propulsion system. At 120%, which is what you're asking for, we could lose containment entirely." "What's the worst-case scenario for containment loss?" Torres asked. Rodriguez's face was grim. "Ship and crew vaporized instantly. Best case, we end up stranded ourselves with no way to rescue anyone." Torres nodded thoughtfully. "And if we maintain safe speeds?" 12 beings die while we're still 8 hours away from their position." The Admiral turned to address the bridge crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice. We can follow safe protocols and arrive in time to recover bodies, or we can risk everything to save lives. I know what choice I'm making, but I won't order anyone to follow me into potential death. Any crew member who wants to transfer to one of the trailing ships has 60 seconds to make that decision. The bridge remained perfectly still. No one moved. Very well, Torres said. Engineering, push all drives to 125% capacity. Helmsman, plot the most direct course to the Star Whisper's position. All ships, this is Thunderchild. We are now in emergency rescue configuration. Follow our lead. Across E, the human fleet. Massive engines roared beyond their design specifications. The Defiant, already running ahead of the main fleet, pushed even harder. Captain Morrison watched his engine readings climb into red warning zones, while his chief engineer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, performed mechanical miracles to keep the systems from failing. Captain, I'm reading quantum fluctuations in the drive core, Kim reported. If we maintain this speed for more than 6 hours, we risk a complete shutdown. Morrison studied the navigation display. We need 7 hours to reach them. Can you give me 7 hours, Lieutenant? Kim's hands flew over her controls, rerouting power, adjusting field harmonics, and manually calibrating systems that were never meant to operate at these extremes. I can give you 7 hours, sir. Maybe 8. But after that, we'll be lucky if we can maintain normal space propulsion. Then we'd better make this count, Morrison replied. In the depths of space, the Star Whisper continued its death spiral while its crew fought for every breath. The two emergency recyclers hummed frantically, processing carbon dioxide and extracting every molecule of oxygen from their rapidly diminishing atmosphere. Captain Zephyr watched her crewmates enter meditation sleep one by one, slowing their metabolisms to extend their survival time. She would remain awake as long as possible, monitoring their status and maintaining hope that the impossible rescue attempt racing toward them through the void would somehow succeed. The humans, these young and supposedly primitive Deathworlders, had done something no other species in galactic history had attempted. They had committed nearly a quarter of their fleet to save 12 strangers, risking the lives of thousands to save a few. As the Star Whisper's systems continued failing around them, Zephyr began to understand that perhaps the galaxy had underestimated humanity in more ways than one. 6 hours into their desperate flight, the human fleet pushed deeper into uncharted space while their engines screamed in protest. Aboard the Thunderchild, Admiral Torres watched damage reports flood in from across her ships. 3 destroyers had already suffered drive failures and fallen behind, while 2 cruisers reported critical system warnings. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we're receiving a priority transmission from Galactic Council Emergency Coordination. They want to speak with you. Torres grimaced. The Galactic Council's emergency protocols were notoriously bureaucratic, designed more for paperwork than actual emergencies. Put them through. A holographic image materialized showing Coordinator Vex, a tall, thin ethereal with the typically condescending expression his species wore when dealing with humans. Admiral Torres, we have received reports of an unauthorized military deployment in violation of galactic emergency response protocols. You are ordered to reduce speed to safe parameters and await proper rescue coordination. Coordinator Vex, Torres replied evenly, we are conducting a time-critical rescue operation. Every minute we delay means death for 12 innocent beings. Admiral, your species lacks the experience for deep space emergency operations. The proper procedure is to file a rescue request with the Galactic Emergency Fleet. They will dispatch appropriate vessels within 48 to 72 hours. Torres felt her jaw clench. Coordinator, those beings will be dead in 3 hours. Your appropriate vessels will arrive in time to collect corpses. That is regrettable, but protocol exists for good reason. The Galactic Council cannot permit individual species to risk valuable military assets on emotionally driven rescue attempts. Stand down immediately or face sanctions. Torres looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. She saw the same determination reflected in every expression. Coordinator Vex, with all due respect, the Galactic Council can file their sanctions in their recycling chutes. We have people to save. She cut the transmission, leaving the ethereal's shocked expression frozen for a moment before the hologram disappeared. Ma'am, her tactical officer said quietly, that's going to cause some serious diplomatic problems. Let me worry about the diplomats, Torres replied. Right now our only concern is reaching the Star Whisper before their air runs out. Meanwhile, aboard the lead destroyer Defiant, Captain Morrison was fighting his own battle against failing systems. The ship's quantum drive was operating at 130% capacity, well beyond any safety margin ever contemplated by its designers. Captain, Chief Engineer Kim reported, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked. I'm detecting microfractures in the primary containment field. If the field collapses, the quantum cascade will destroy us and everything within 50,000 kilometers. Morrison studied his chronometer. They were still 2 hours away from the Star Whisper, but their current speed would get them there with maybe 30 minutes to spare. How long can you hold the field together? Maybe 90 minutes, sir. Possibly 2 hours if I reroute everything through secondary systems and pray to whatever gods watch over insane engineers. Do it, Morrison ordered. And Lieutenant Kim, if you can pull this off, I'm recommending you for every engineering award in the book. Kim grinned despite the desperate situation. Just promise me shore leave after this, sir. Assuming we all survive. On the Star Whisper, the situation had become critical. The emergency recyclers had failed 20 minutes apart, leaving the crew with whatever oxygen remained in their sealed compartment. Captain Zephyr watched her friends and colleagues slip into unconsciousness one by one as carbon dioxide levels rose. Engineer Thok was the first to succumb, his massive form going limp as his respiratory system shut down. Navigator Pip followed minutes later, her small body unable to process the poisoned air. One by one, Zephyr's crewmates fell into comas that would become permanent if rescue didn't arrive soon. Zephyr herself began to feel the drowsiness that preceded unconsciousness. Her 6 arms felt heavy and her thoughts came slowly. She activated their emergency beacon one final time, sending a weak signal into the void. Human fleet, this is Captain Zephyr. Our recyclers have failed. We are going to sleep now. If you can hear this, we are grateful that someone answered. Please tell our families that we died knowing someone cared enough to try. The transmission cut out as Zephyr collapsed beside her crew, aboard the Defiant. Morrison received the message just as his ship's quantum drive began showing critical failure warnings. The timing was impossibly tight. They could reach the Star Whisper in 90 minutes, but their engines might fail in 75. Sir, Kim called from engineering, I'm reading cascade fluctuations throughout the drive core. We need to shut down now or risk total destruction. Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the Star Whisper's position. 12 beings lay dying in that distant ship, having already slipped beyond consciousness. In 90 minutes, they would be too far gone for revival. In 75 minutes, his own ship might cease to exist. Lieutenant Kim, he said slowly, how much can you give me? Not what's safe, not what's recommended. How much? There was a long pause before Kim responded. I can give you 2 hours, Captain, but at the cost of the ship, the quantum drive will be completely destroyed, and we'll need a full tow back to base. We'll be defenseless until the fleet catches up. Morrison thought about the Galactic Council's recommendation to abandon the rescue. He thought about the reasonable, logical decision to preserve his ship and crew, rather than risk everything for 12 strangers. Then he thought about the message from Captain Zephyr, grateful that someone had cared enough to try. Give me 2 hours, Lieutenant. We're bringing them home. The Defiant surged forward through space, its engines burning beyond all safety limits, racing against time and physics to reach 12 dying beings who had dared to hope that someone, somewhere would answer their call for help. Behind them, the main fleet continued their desperate pursuit while across the galaxy, the Galactic Council prepared formal protests against humanity's reckless disregard for proper emergency procedures. But in the vastness of space, where death waited in the cold and dark, a single human destroyer pushed forward into the unknown, carrying with it the simple conviction that no plea for help should ever go unanswered. The Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light speed with a thunderous shudder that echoed through every deck. Warning lights bathed the bridge in angry red as Chief Engineer Kim's voice crackled over the communication system. Drive core is completely dead, Captain. We're running on backup fusion power only. No weapons, minimal shields, and life support is operating at basic levels. Captain Morrison didn't take his eyes off the main display, where the Star Whisper hung motionless against the stars like a beautiful crystal tomb. How long since their last transmission? 47 minutes, sir, his communications officer reported grimly. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. Medical protocols suggested that most species could survive in toxic atmosphere for 30 to 45 minutes before brain damage became permanent. They were cutting it impossibly close. "Launch all shuttles," Morrison ordered. "Emergency medical teams to Shuttle Bay 1. I want atmospheric processors, medical equipment, and our best trauma specialist ready to go in 5 minutes. Dr. Sarah Martinez." The ship's chief medical officer was already suiting up when Morrison arrived in the shuttle bay. Her team had loaded enough equipment to establish a mobile hospital. "Captain," she said, checking her scanner readings, "I'm not detecting any life signs from the Star Whisper. That doesn't necessarily mean they're dead, but it means they're very close to it." "Then we'd better move fast," Morrison replied, climbing into the lead shuttle alongside the medical team. The short flight to the Star Whisper took only minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. As they approached the alien vessel, Morrison was struck by its elegant design. The Kalani built their ships like works of art, all flowing curves and crystalline structures that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. Now it drifted dark and lifeless, its beauty made tragic by circumstance. "Docking successful," the pilot reported. "Sealing airlock. Now." The boarding team moved swiftly through the Star Whisper's corridors, following their scanners toward the navigation alcove, where the crew had made their final stand. The ship's interior was freezing, and their breath misted in the thin air that remained. "Here," Dr. Martinez called, scanning the sealed compartment. 12 life forms, all unconscious. Carbon dioxide levels are at critical toxicity." The human team worked with practiced efficiency, breaking through the sealed hatch and flooding the compartment with fresh atmosphere. Inside, they found the crew of the Star Whisper arranged in a circle, as if they had chosen to face their final moments together. "This one's the captain," Martinez said, scanning the Kalani female whose elegant form lay motionless at the center of the group. "Zephyr, according to the ship's manifest. She's in deep coma but still showing brain activity." The medical teams split up, each taking responsibility for different crew members. Martinez worked on Captain Zephyr while her colleagues attended to the others. The granite skin engineer required specialized equipment due to his massive size and unique physiology. The small squeaker navigator was so tiny that Martinez had to use pediatric medical equipment designed for human children. "I've got a pulse on the Kalani captain," Martinez announced after several tense minutes. "She's responding to oxygen therapy. How are the others?" One by one, the reports came in. The squeaker navigator was stable. The granite skin engineer was breathing on his own. The serpentine communications officer showed positive brain activity. After an hour of intensive treatment, all 12 members of the Star Whisper's crew were stable and showing signs of recovery. Captain Zephyr was the first to regain consciousness, her 6 arms moving weakly as her eyes focused on Dr. Martinez's face. You're human," she whispered in perfect galactic standard. "Yes, I am," Martinez replied with a smile. "Welcome back, Captain. You gave us quite a scare." Zephyr's mandibles clicked weakly. "My crew? All alive. All stable. You're going to be fine." Tears began flowing from Zephyr's compound eyes. In galactic society, public displays of emotion were considered primitive and undignified. But as she lay on the human medical stretcher, surrounded by beings who had risked everything to save strangers, dignity seemed far less important than gratitude. "Why?" she asked. "Your fleet commander. She said you pushed your engines beyond safety limits. You could have died trying to reach us." Dr. Martinez checked her patient's vital signs on her scanner. "Because you asked for help," she said simply. "That's what people do for each other." Outside the Star Whisper, Captain Morrison coordinated the recovery operation from his damaged ship. The rest of the human fleet was still hours away, leaving the Defiant vulnerable and alone in deep space. But Morrison felt no regret about their decision. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "I'm detecting multiple ships approaching our position. Configuration suggests Kalani merchant vessels." Morrison frowned. The nearest Kalani space was weeks away at conventional speeds. "How many ships?" 7. "No, 12 vessels. They appear to be running in formation." As the Kalani fleet approached, Morrison received a transmission from their lead ship. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to an elderly Kalani male, with intricate ceremonial markings on his carapace. "Human vessel. This is Trademaster Keth of the Kalani Merchant Alliance. We received Captain Zephyr's distress beacon and have come to render assistance." Morrison was puzzled. Trademaster, with respect, how did you arrive so quickly? Our calculations showed the nearest Kalani vessels were weeks away at safe speeds, Keth finished. Yes, Captain Morrison. We also pushed our engines beyond safe limits to reach this location. Captain Zephyr she is my daughter. The words hung in space between them, carrying the weight of parental love that transcended species barriers. Morrison understood immediately. The Kalani had risked their own ships and crews in the same desperate gamble that humanity had made. Trademaster, Morrison said, your daughter is safe. Her entire crew survived. For the first time in Morrison's experience, he saw a Kalani weep openly. Trademaster Keth's compound eyes shed tears that sparkled like diamonds in the bridge lighting. Captain Morrison, Keth said when he had composed himself, the Kalani people will remember this day. You have given me back my daughter's life. As if summoned by the moment, Admiral Torres's voice crackled over the communications system. The main human fleet had finally arrived, their own engines damaged but functional. Defiant, this is Admiral Torres. Status report. Morrison looked around his damaged bridge, then at the Kalani fleet surrounding them in protective formation, then at the medical bay displays showing 12 recovering alien beings. Mission successful, Admiral. All survivors recovered. The fleet performed magnificently. Outstanding work, Captain. Now let's get everyone home. In the navigation alcove of the Star Whisper, Captain Zephyr listened to the communications between human and Kalani ships, her father's voice speaking in grateful tones to the humans who had saved her life. Admiral Torres coordinating the safe return of both fleets, the easy cooperation between species that had never worked together before. She began to realize that something significant had happened here, something that went far beyond a simple rescue operation. The humans had shown the galaxy something new about what it meant to answer a call for help. 3 weeks after the rescue, Captain Zephyr stood in the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council, her 6 arms steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. The massive chamber contained representatives from 47 different species, their various forms creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. At the center of the hall, the Council's governing body sat in judgment. Coordinator Vex, the ethereal who had ordered the human fleet to stand down, held a datapad containing formal charges against Admiral Torres and the human military command. His voice echoed through the chamber with bureaucratic precision. The humans violated 17 separate emergency response protocols, Vex announced. They deployed military assets without Council authorization, exceeded safe operational parameters, and ignored direct orders from emergency coordination. Most seriously, they risked valuable fleet resources on an operation that had less than 12% probability of success. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The mathematics were indeed harsh. Traditional galactic emergency response doctrine prioritized the preservation of rescue assets over risky attempts to save small numbers of beings. It was logical, efficient, and had served the galaxy well for thousands of years. Admiral Torres sat in the defendants section, her uniform pristine despite the ordeal her fleet had endured. She showed no sign of regret or apology. Beside her, Captain Morrison and the other human officers maintained the same resolute bearing. The Council recognizes Captain Zephyr of the Kalani Merchant Alliance, the speaker announced. You may address the assembly. Zephyr moved to the testimony platform, acutely aware that every word she spoke would be recorded and analyzed across the galaxy. She had requested permission to speak on behalf of the humans, a decision that had caused considerable surprise among her own people. Honorable representatives, she began, her translator collar converting her clicks and whistles to standard galactic speech. I stand before you as someone who was dead. Not metaphorically, not technically, but literally dead. My crew and I had breathed our last breath, spoken our final words, and accepted that we would never see our families again. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. The mathematics that Coordinator Vex cited are correct. A 12% success probability, massive resource expenditure, violation of established protocols. By every logical measure, the humans should have filed the appropriate paperwork and moved on with their duties. Agreement rippled through the assembly. This was exactly the point the prosecution had been making. But here is what those mathematics do not calculate. Zephyr said, her voice growing stronger. They do not account for the value of hope. They do not measure the worth of compassion. They cannot quantify the power of a species that refuses to let mathematics determine who lives and who dies. She turned to face Admiral Torres. When the humans received our distress call, they did not consult probability tables. They did not calculate cost-benefit ratios. They heard people in trouble, and they responded with everything they had. In the gallery reserved for observers, Trademaster Keth watched his daughter with obvious pride. The entire Kalani delegation had come to support the humans, as had representatives from several other species. The humans pushed their engines beyond all safety limits. Zephyr continued. They risked the destruction of 49 warships and the deaths of thousands of crew members. For 12 strangers they had never met, from species they barely knew in a region of space that offered them no strategic or economic advantage. Coordinator Vex interrupted. Captain, you are describing exactly the kind of emotional decision-making that leads to disaster. What if the humans had failed? What if their entire fleet had been destroyed? The galaxy would have lost valuable military assets and thousands of trained personnel. Zephyr's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as amusement. Coordinator Vex, with respect, the galaxy has been calculating those risks for millennia. And in all that time, how many species have developed the reputation for answering any call for help, regardless of the odds? The question hung in the chamber like a challenge. No species in galactic history had ever attempted what the humans had done. Most would have considered it foolish beyond measure. I have studied human history since my rescue, Zephyr announced. Their planet is indeed a death world, as many of you know. But what makes it truly dangerous is not the predators or the natural disasters. What makes Earth dangerous is that it taught humans that survival depends on cooperation, that the strong protect the weak, and that no one gets left behind. She gestured toward the human delegation. These beings come from a world where evolution rewarded those who helped others, where survival meant working together against impossible odds. They have taken that lesson and brought it to the stars. Captain Morrison found himself thinking about Earth, about the countless human stories of people risking everything to help strangers. Firefighters running into burning buildings, Coast Guard sailing into hurricanes, mountain climbers attempting impossible rescues. It was, he realized, simply what humans did. The humans have shown us something we had forgotten, Zephyr continued. They have reminded us that intelligence without compassion is merely computation, that logic without heart is just cold mathematics. Yes, they violated protocols. Yes, they took unreasonable risks. And yes, because of those violations and risks, 12 beings are alive today who should be dead. She looked directly at Coordinator Vex. You ask what would have happened if they had failed. I ask you this. What happens to a galaxy where no one is willing to try impossible rescues? What becomes of a civilization that has calculated the exact price of every life and decided that most of them are not worth saving? The assembly had grown completely silent. Even species that were traditionally rivals were listening intently to the small Kalani merchant captain who had become an unlikely advocate for humanity. The humans did not save us because the odds were good, Zephyr concluded. They saved us because we asked for help. In a galaxy full of species that pride themselves on logic and efficiency, they are the only ones who still remember that sometimes. The right thing to do is also the impossible thing to do. She returned to her seat, leaving the assembly to contemplate her words. In the defendant section, Admiral Torres allowed herself a small smile. Whatever the council decided, she knew that Captain Zephyr had articulated something important about what made humanity different. The formal deliberations would continue for hours, but the real judgment had already been rendered. Across the galaxy, billions of beings were hearing the story of the simple call for help that had been met with a Deathworlder fleet, and many of them were beginning to wonder if perhaps the humans understood something about civilization that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. 6 months later, Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Emergency Response Station, watching the most unusual fleet in galactic history conduct joint training exercises. Human destroyers flew alongside Kalani merchant vessels fitted with rescue equipment. Granite skin heavy haulers practiced coordination maneuvers with squeaker-fast scouts. Ethereal hospital ships worked in formation with dozens of other species, all united by a common purpose that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Quite a sight, isn't it? Captain Zephyr said, joining Torres at the massive viewport. The Kalani captain now wore the insignia of the new Galactic Emergency Response Coordinator, a position created specifically for her after the council hearings. Torres smiled. I never imagined our little rescue mission would lead to all this. The Council's final decision had been unprecedented. While officially censuring the human fleet for protocol violations, they had simultaneously voted to completely restructure galactic emergency response procedures. The Torres Protocol, as it had become known, prioritized speed and commitment over bureaucratic efficiency. More importantly, it established the principle that any species could call for help without regard to politics, territorial boundaries, or diplomatic status. "Your government must be pleased," Zephyr observed. 3 new species have applied to join the coalition in the last month alone. Torres nodded. The human coalition had indeed grown rapidly, as species across the galaxy sought association with the beings who had proven that no call for help would go unanswered. But the growth brought its own challenges. "Captain Morrison sends his regards, by the way," Torres said. "His new ship is being commissioned next week. The Persistence, fitted with the latest rescue equipment." "I heard." Zephyr clicked with amusement. "Named after humanity's most notable characteristic, I assume." They watched as a mixed squadron of ships practiced high-speed rescue formations. The techniques being developed here would save countless lives across the galaxy. But more than that, they were changing how species interacted with each other. "Admiral," Zephyr said thoughtfully, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Before you ordered your fleet to our position, did you truly believe you could succeed?" The odds were so heavily against success that most commanders would have considered the attempt suicide. Torres considered the question carefully. "I believed that trying was more important than succeeding. We couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't attempt the rescue. Whether we succeeded or failed was secondary to the attempt itself." "That is perhaps the most human thing I have ever heard," Zephyr replied. "And it explains everything." A communication alert chimed, interrupting their conversation. Torres activated her personal communicator to receive an urgent message from Galactic Emergency Coordination. "Admiral Torres, this is Emergency Coordinator Vex. We have a situation developing in the Andromeda sector. A colony transport with 8,000 beings aboard has suffered catastrophic system failure. They are approximately 6 light-years from the nearest response station, and conventional rescue protocols estimate 48 hours minimum response time." Torres felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with emergency calls. "What's the transport status?" "Life support failure across multiple decks. They estimate they have 12 to 14 hours before conditions become critical." "Admiral, the mathematics on this one are even worse than your rescue of the Star Whisper. 8,000 lives, but the distance and timing make conventional rescue virtually impossible." Zephyr was already moving toward the command center. "Admiral, I'll coordinate the multi-species response. How many ships do you think we'll need?" Torres was calculating distances and speeds in her head. "Everything we have. And then some." She activated the general fleet channel. "All ships, all species, this is Admiral Torres. Emergency deployment authorized. We have 8,000 beings in trouble." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human vessels began powering up alongside Kalani traders fitted with life support equipment. Granite skin haulers with massive cargo capacities prepared to receive evacuees. Squeaker scouts plotted the fastest possible routes. Even ethereal hospital ships, usually reserved for low-risk operations, joined the formation. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving volunteer confirmations from 47 ships representing 18 different species. The Rillan Confederacy is sending their entire 7th Fleet. The Zephyrian Empire is dispatching emergency medical teams. Even the isolationist Crystalline Collective has offered assistance." Torres felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with humanity's role in this response. "Coordinator Vex, please inform the colony transport that help is on the way. Multiple species, maximum effort, impossible odds." "Admiral." Vex's voice carried a note of something Torres had never heard from the usually bureaucratic ethereal. "I want you to know that the Emergency Council has pre-authorized whatever measures you deem necessary. No protocols, no restrictions, no political considerations. Bring them home." As the massive multi-species fleet prepared to depart, Torres realized that Captain Zephyr had been right. The rescue of the Star Whisper had changed more than just emergency procedures. It had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the most important calculations had nothing to do with mathematics. "Fleet status report," Torres called. "All ships ready for departure, Admiral. Estimated arrival time at colony transport position is 10 hours, 37 minutes. "Then let's go save some lives," Torres said. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed. carrying with it the hopes of 8,000 beings who were about to discover that their simple call for help would be met not just with a Deathworlder fleet, but with the combined compassion of an entire galaxy that had finally remembered what it meant to care for strangers. In the depths of space, the colony transport New Horizon detected the approach of the rescue fleet and transmitted a message of grateful disbelief. Their distress call had been answered by more ships than some species possessed in their entire military. The response included beings they had never heard of, from regions of space they couldn't pronounce, united by nothing more than the shared conviction that no one should face death alone in the dark. Captain Zephyr watched the fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel, then turned back to her duties coordinating the galaxy's new emergency response network. There would be other calls for help, other impossible rescues, other chances to prove that compassion could triumph over cold mathematics. The simple call that had started it all had grown into something magnificent. A galaxy where anyone in trouble could send a distress signal into the void and know with absolute certainty that someone, somewhere, would answer, and that answer would come not as a single ship, but as a fleet of beings who had learned that the most important calculation in the universe was not the odds of success, but the willingness to try. The Deathworlders had indeed changed everything, not through conquest or superior technology, but through the simple revolutionary idea that helping strangers was worth any risk. And across the galaxy, that idea was spreading like a flame, lighting up the darkness one rescue at a time.